antes de presentar ahora sí a mi querida colega Trish Bartley. Es un absoluto placer tenerte aquí, Trish. Estoy segura que muchos de vosotros ya conocéis a Trish. Y bueno, quienes no la conozcáis, esta es una magnífica oportunidad. Destacar de Trish. Hay muchas cosas que destacar. Pero quería comentar, Trish bueno, ha sido una destacada pionera de todo lo que es el programa MBCT desde su origen. Trish estuvo muy involucrada en la primera formación, en las primeras formaciones, allá por finales de los años 90. Y es miembro fundador del Centro de Mindfulness de la Universidad de la Universidad de Bangor. Y ha estado formada por John Kabat-Zinn, John Tisdale y Mark Williams. Trish además es una reconocidísima autora de Mindfulness para el cáncer, tiene una adaptación del programa MBCT en entornos oncológicos y tiene un libro maravilloso que sé que muchos de vosotros ya conocéis y muchos de vosotros también tenéis, que es MBCT para el cáncer. Quizá menos conocido de Trish es esta faceta como realmente defensora incansable del desarrollo de comunidades, del desarrollo comunitario, porque Trish ha trabajado mucho en comunidades marginadas tanto en el Reino Unido como en Sudáfrica, y con el principal foco de empoderar, de realmente enriquecer, de estimular la creatividad y el enriquecimiento de las personas más marginadas. Y bueno, realmente lo que ha hecho Trish en su último libro, que es el libro que recoge precisamente las enseñanzas de Mindfulness en grupo, el enseñar a los grupos en intervenciones basadas en Mindfulness, de alguna manera encapsula estas dos pasiones, estos dos ámbitos de experiencia, esta grandísima riqueza de su conocimiento y experiencia, que es el trabajo con los grupos, el trabajo con las comunidades y en el ámbito de la enseñanza de Mindfulness. Y la idea principal es cómo maximizar el potencial del grupo, cómo maximizar el potencial de aprendizaje en grupo y cómo potenciar también esas habilidades interpersonales. Y bueno, de esto va el webinar, que es una pildorita de lo que Trish va a ofrecernos en el próximo seminario del mes de noviembre, que tendrá lugar los días 18 y 19 de noviembre. Así que Trish, pues repito, un absoluto placer tenerte aquí y bienvenida.
Thank you so much, Estrella. That's very nice. That's very kind of you. It's always a mixed pleasure to be introduced, isn't it? Because it's lovely to hear all those nice things about yourself, but it's also, you kind of think, well, let's just wait and see how you find it, you know? So yes, thank you, Estrella, and thank you for asking me to come along this evening, because I do feel very passionately about groups. I feel very passionately about mindfulness. So for me, there's lots of learning, even though I've written a book about it, there's loads and loads of learning for me around what is this relationship between mindfulness and group? What does the group add to mindfulness? And what does mindfulness add to the group? And that's what we'll explore much more on the workshop, but maybe we'll just drop a few seeds in today. So I'm aware that I mustn't talk too fast, although Maria is very clever at translating. But I need to slow down a little bit in my excitement to share this with you. So yeah, thinking about where to start, I think maybe the best place to start is sharing some slides with you that describes the model. The model is called the inside out group model. the inside of the teacher, the awareness, the practice of the teacher, and the out of the group, if you like, or the out of what goes on outside the person guiding the practice or the person leading the inquiry. But of course, so there's also inside out in every participant. There's inside out in every group. So it's not just teacher and participants or teacher and group. It's what's happening really throughout the whole. So I'm going to first of all just share these slides with you, and just see what you make of them. So Estrella, could you give me a thumbs up to say that it's yeah, great. So you can see them okay. So here we are, the inside out group model. No, that's not right. Let's go back one. Let's do that. I'll get my keyboard ready. So the inside out group model, and as you see, it's incredibly simple. We deliberately made it very, very simple. So if you're taking notes, any of you, you don't need to, but if you were, you would just be drawing a circle, and inside the circle is a triangle, which is the inside out embodying of the teacher. And then around the little edges of the circle, we have these three capacities that are called reading, holding, and befriending the group. So let's just explore that in a little bit more detail. Okay, so there we are. That's the book that Gemma Griffith and I wrote. You probably met Gemma. She is a very sound academic, and she wrote the research side of the book, the sort of academic theoretical side. And I wrote the more of the practice and the process side of the book. And that's the workshop that's going to be happening in next month, 18th and 19th of November, which I'm really looking forward to. And Estrella and I are going to work together, and I love working with Estrella, so that's always a treat. Okay, so come on, behave, please. That's it. Okay, so I've put a red triangle. So first of all, we have to go to this place, and this really is representing the teacher, and the teacher's embodying of mindfulness, which you all have been trained tremendously in, I'm sure. I mean, if as teacher we just teach technically and we're not able to really embody what we're teaching, the process goes nowhere. I mean, we all know that the days where, I don't know, we've had a row with somebody, or we're worried about something and we're trying to guide a practice, and actually, the feedback or the inquiry in the group actually tells us that people are distracted and they're not really there, and they were thinking about this, and actually a lot of it sort of, it's not our fault, but a lot of it stems from the capacity of the teacher to be embodied. So that's the first place to look at, really. And then we look at reading. So it's interesting to think about reading the group. We think about reading a book, but actually we're reading all the time. You're reading me as you see me on the screen. You're reading the slides. But in terms of reading the group, we use body language a lot. Even online, we use body language. I'm working quite a lot with groups in China at the moment. It's very interesting just to see the movement on the screen. And it's so clear that when there's a lot of movement, there's not much engagement. People are dealing with what's going on, families and, phone calls and all sorts of things happening. And it's very interesting that even online, we can read quite a lot of body language, the levels of engagement. You can't when you're doing slides, because I can only see about 5 of you, but and then group theory. Theory is quite important in reading, and in the workshop we'll look at not too much theory, but just enough that will give us some pointers as to what theories we can bring into teaching groups that might be helpful to us, and a lot of them relate to the development of the group, which I'll talk a little bit about later. Now, the area that's very interesting indeed is looking at the influence of personal history on what people bring into groups. We all do this. You know, we all had first families. We were all had different sort of positions, different roles in the family that actually have, for many of us, unless we've done a lot of work on ourselves, still influence us when we're in a group, which is fascinating, actually. And this is very true for our participants as they come into the group room, into the Zoom room, into the room itself, into the presence. And then the social constructs, which we're more and more looking at. These are issues around race and identity, gender, age, educational background, class background. You know, all the things, all the ways in society that we make people different, or that we feel different ourselves. All the systems that actually discriminate and say that, you know, this group of people is better than this group of people. It's all kind of hidden. It's not sort of, well, usually it's not front of face. Sometimes it is, but it influences us all the time. And some of these discriminations or differences are visible. Some of them are invisible. And so it's really important we have some awareness of that in the groups that we teach. And then there's trauma, which I'm sure, you know, you've all been taught about. You've all been taught about the importance of having trauma-sensitive mindfulness practice, trauma-sensitive teaching. But trauma, it comes into the group as well. You know, that somebody who's experiencing recent trauma, who's affected by trauma in the group, that will affect everybody as well, to some extent. So reading the group is really important, because unless we can read the group, we can't possibly hold the group. We don't know what the group needs. So holding is lovely. I mean, holding is, the metaphor that's always used is a bit like the mother and the child, or the caregiver and the child. You know, when the child is very little, I've been watching today, I live on an estate, and there's a baby park outside, which I enjoy a lot. And there's a baby who I saw when he was only a day old, or just out of hospital. And he's just had his first, or one of his first goes on the slide, just at the bottom of the slide. So his mum was holding him carefully as he was just coming down the bottom of the slide. That's what we're doing with holding. In the early days of a group needs a lot of holding. They need structure, they need support, just like we do with young babies. But of course, as little Arthur, that's his name, gets older, he won't want his mum to hold him all the time. He'll be going up those steps. I should think, give him 6 months. He'll be up those steps. He'll be going, no, mum, I'm fine. Stand out the way. Well, he won't, because he won't be speaking. But his message will be, let me come, maybe a year, let me come down the slide on my own. So there's quite a lot there about leadership style. You know, how we hold a group differs from one of us to another. It depends a lot also on, it depends quite a bit on the context. You know, if we're working with clinical groups, it might be a bit different to if we're working with open groups or teenagers or workplace. It'll be a little bit different. The inside-out practice guiding is very much a way that we hold the group. And the inquiry and the facilitation is another way. And it's also a way that the group actually holds itself and learns how to hold itself. And then we've got this business where holding individuals in the group. We may be very aware of an individual who perhaps is struggling at the moment. And we're also holding the group, and we're holding the process as a whole, all of which is complicated. It's skillful, but it's also fascinating. And of course, it, like everything else, we get better at it as we practice it more. So then we have befriending. And this is the last one of the three, but of course, it's been there all the way along. So we brought in this 4 friends for life, which may be familiar to you. This is a kind of a translation, if you like, of the Buddhist Brahma Viharas. And of course, there's kindness, there's appreciation, there's compassion, and there's balance. Rather than equanimity, we've called it balance. And we're befriending ourselves as teachers, and we're befriending the group as well, of course. So there you have the model. It's quite simple, but it's also quite profound. It's quite complex. And we'll finish up with the workshop, which obviously we're really keen to see you on. We'd really love to see some of you to come to that. So let's come back to the screen. There we are. Yeah, So there you have the sort of basics of the model, and it's simple to apply, and there's a lot to learn within it. So I hope that it's whetted your appetite. Yeah.
Quizá comenzamos con esta segunda parte de la conversación, Trish. Trish, ¿qué es lo que tienen los grupos que tanto te apasionan y que con lo que estás tan implicada?
You know, it's a lovely question, Estrella, and it's quite complicated, because I think with all things that have a lot of meaning for us, I think quite a lot of it goes back to sort of personal history. So I think that, you know, we do the work with others that we need to do most with ourselves. You know, I mean, it's an old cliche in a way, but I think, you know, feeling belonging, I think, is something that we all yearn for. You know, to feel fully accepted, to be able to be ourselves in the group, whether it's a mindfulness group or a family group, whatever it is, to be able to show ourselves and be real, be authentic, be present, to be kind, to bring all those qualities in that mean a lot to us, I think is incredibly precious. And I also think it's very healing. So I think there's something about groups, and there's something about mindfulness groups, or learning mindfulness in groups, or practicing mindfulness in groups, that offers us some very particular possibilities. And this is what really interests me. I mean, I used to be, as you said, I used to be a community worker. I used to work with all sorts of different groups of people, youngsters, you know, young single parents in high-rise flats, all sorts of people. And I was very ill-equipped to do that work when I started, very, very ill-equipped. But there was often a way in which the group offered me something that I'd often didn't get in other places. There was some sense of connection, I think, some sense of meaning, some sense of values that I was able to practice in supporting people who were very marginalized. So it's a hard question to answer, but it's one that I sort of know internally quite a bit. And of course, bringing it into mindfulness, I think groups and mindfulness are kind of, you know, they add a lot to each other, which I think I've already said. Yeah. So if we can somehow build training, teacher training, so that we're all more skillful with groups, I believe that mindfulness practice and our communities and our world will benefit. Yeah. Best I can do, Estrella.
Gracias, Trish. Y es así, ¿no? Los grupos tienen una importancia crucial en nuestra vida para conformar identidades y para sentirnos conectados, y esto que comentas de el poder curativo de los grupos, ¿no? Y una cosa que me sorprende es, siendo tan importante, la poca investigación que ha habido en mindfulness acerca del poder de los grupos. Ha habido mucha investigación, investigación relacionada con los beneficios individuales, pero ¿qué pasa con el grupo? ¿Por qué es así, Trish? ¿Qué crees?
It's such a good question. It's another good. I'm steaming up because I'm getting hot and passionate about groups. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we could posit, if you like, we could muse that maybe the reason is because, you know, our key researchers have been superb scientists, many of them absolutely superb scientists, whose backgrounds come in one-to-one work. But also who, you know, it's hard to measure the value of a group. It's very hard. So mostly what's happened is that the group has become invisible, as you say, or the group is invisible. And what's happened is that the research measures are all about individual outcomes. You know, we look at sort of reduction in depression, reduction in anxiety, increased well-being. All of these things are all about the individual, and the individual fills in the questionnaire or responds to the scientist. I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? So this is changing a little bit. There is a little bit more research into groups, a little bit more, not a huge amount, but a bit. It's just beginning. I think it'll grow. But of course, I think the other reason is that, you know, research in groups is very difficult. But one of the bits of research that I think is fascinating, and that's that when a group of teachers were interviewed and a group of their participants were interviewed, the teachers didn't mention the group very much at all. The teachers, you know, the group didn't really figure. It's very interesting. And when the participants were interviewed, the participants all referred to the group and all referred to how important the group was to their learning and to how mindfulness landed with them. And I think that's very important research for us to take on board, that it's quite possible as teachers for us to teach people one-to-one. You know, we have people on the screen. It's quite difficult to bring a group together on the screen. It's, you know, it does require practice and skill. It's not easy. But it's easy for me to look at Fatima and talk to her, and then look at Joseph and talk to him, and then see there's Sylvia. And, you know, it's easy to relate to individuals and not actually join people up into a group. You know, just looking, if you were to look at the screen now, you know, what sort of group are you? You know, what if we were to read the group now, it's quite reflective, you know, it's quite still, quite engaged, I think. But definitely quite reflective. There's kind of like a slight sort of downward look. You know what I mean? There's kind of like, So we can still read the group, even though. So just that measure of just remembering that teachers don't think groups are that important, but participants do. That's worth remembering.
Ya, es interesante esto que has comentado, ¿no? ¿Qué clase de grupo es este? Como si el grupo tuviera una identidad propia que fuera diferente de los individuos, ¿no? Y supongo que eso también es clave para sostener y para trabajar con el
Yes.
tomar esa identidad diferente a la suma de individuos, ¿no?
I think so, Estrella, actually. I do think so. I think that groups, particularly if we think of an 8-week group, but actually even if, I think I was in South Africa in March, and I was working, had a brilliant time working in a psychiatric hospital, big psychiatric hospital. All sorts of staff members came in. We had gardeners, we had doctors, we had nurses, social workers, admin people, cleaners, the lot. And it was very interesting that there were 3 different drop-in groups, and they were very different. They were very different, partly influenced by the group members. You know, if there were more doctors and they were a bit more academic and theoretical, you know, had these 2 gorgeous gardeners who I just completely fell for, who were so present and there, you know, and very much really getting into the practice. It was brilliant. So I think that we really can see a difference in the character of the group, and I think this is part of our skill in reading, of what sort of group. And of course it changes. A group that arrives on the first week of an 8-week course will be tremendously different by the time it gets to the 8th week or the 5th week, or, do you know what I mean? You know, like we develop, but groups develop as well with their own characteristics. And it's a very rewarding process to work with the group as well as working with the individuals, like another entity in the room, if you like. It's very rewarding.
Sí, y mientras te escuchaba estaba pensando también cómo nuestra capacidad de leer al grupo y de sostener al grupo moldea la identidad del grupo, ¿no? Y muchas veces sin darnos cuenta, nos demos cuenta o no nos demos cuenta, pero la moldea, ¿no? ¿Estás de acuerdo?
Well, I do, but what I think increasingly is that we imagine that we're the center of things. We all do that. You know, we imagine that as individuals we are, you know, we see the world out of these eyes. You know, I'm the center of my universe. Yeah. you know, I wish it was different, but actually, you know, it's kind of almost inevitable. And I think as teachers, it's very easy for us to see that, to think that actually we are the ones that make or break the group. And to some extent, it's true. I mean, one of the things that we'll cover, we'll look at in some detail, I think, is how we can help the group to form at the beginning of the process, whether that's a 2-day process or an 8-week process or maybe a 2-hour process. There needs to be some sort of forming that happens at the beginning of a group. Otherwise, it's all a bit chaotic. And some of that you'll already be doing, I'm sure, you know, you'll be doing without even thinking and calling it forming. But there'll be a lot of it that you may not be aware is really helpful. And even if you're already doing it, it's quite helpful to know what you're doing and why it's helpful. So unless groups form in a way that's really quite healthy and quite safe, I mean, that's important. I think this business of being safe and inclusive are 2 watchwords for me. They're the 2 key words that we're all the time looking for. Is this group safe? Is this process safe? Is this moment safe? Not so that it's so solid that it's not interesting, but is it safe so that nobody's going to come to harm here? That's really important. And then the other word that I think is very important that we'll be learning a lot about on the workshop is inclusive. Is this group inclusive? Is this a place that people can step into and belong? You know, is this a place that people can not just feel safe with, but they can actually perhaps express themselves with? You know, they may not necessarily talk all that much, but they can actually nod their head. They can step forward and actually engage in what's going on in the group, even if they're very young or they're very lacking in confidence or whatever. So safe and inclusive are personally my 2, well, they're not just for but they're the sort of watchwords. So forming the group is very important. On the workshop, we'll spend quite a lot of time on that. And then we'll also, sorry, go on.
No, esa era mi pregunta. ¿Qué es lo que vamos a ver, que vamos a ver en detalle en lo que es la gestión, la dinamización, la enseñanza de grupos basados en mindfulness?
Sure. Well, I jumped your question, so sorry, Australia. But yes, we'll start with the forming of the group. And I think what's quite interesting, which I enjoy a lot, is that those of you who come to the workshop, you'll find that you'll learn a lot from being there as an individual, as a participant, but you'll also have lots of opportunity to sort of look at the process. So you'll learn through the experience of actually being in a group. I hope being taught by someone I'm pretty experienced with groups. I've been working with groups since I was in my 20s, and I'm now very old. That was 50 years ago. I'm now in my 70s. So, you know, I work with a lot of groups. And so you'll have that opportunity to look at layer upon layer of groups. You'll be in small groups, you'll be in a large group. We'll do quite a lot of inquiry, which will be helpful for you to look at, well, how can I use the group in my inquiries? You know, because again, we tend to look at just one-to-one. I'm gonna work with you, and now I'm going to ask you, how can we join the group up? How can we keep everybody involved as we lead our inquiries? You know, what is the role of the group in inquiry? Because it's huge, actually, and it's so important. Otherwise, people get bored and they switch off, and you know, it's the same people talking each time. So we'll also look at this, remembering what I shared with you on the model. We'll look at, so inside out embodying. What does that mean, and how can I do that? How can you do that? How can I do that as I'm teaching? You know, I'm doing it now. I'm aware of my feet on the floor. I'm aware of my body as I'm teaching. I use my body a lot. I move my head. I move my hand. You know, I think I mean, I'm English, for heaven's sake. So if I do that, you guys from more Mediterranean countries will do it much more. You know, you'll be much more busy with your hands, and rather than doing that automatically, you know, bringing awareness into your own mindful embodying is tremendously valuable. so that you're authentic as teachers and you're able to really connect with the group. So that triangle in the middle, we will be practicing quite a bit in different ways. And then the reading I've talked about, we've got some nice exercises where we can explore reading, share a bit of theory with you. And then there's the holding. And again, I've got some colleagues in the Netherlands, and we've got some nice Aikido exercises that actually practice holding. That's quite interesting, you know, doing it in a very, using awareness to really hold the group, which is what we need to do. And then befriending gets threaded all the way through, really. So I think the other big area that is really interesting, which you may well find, those of you who come to the workshop, you may find is the most memorable, and that's the whole area of what is it that participants bring with them into the group. And we've got some quite significant and quite challenging exercises, actually, just to really explore that, both in terms of personal history, but in terms of social construct, which I shared with you. And that's really important, and it's very salient for understanding about our own teaching and helping us not to take too personally things when participants perhaps are storming, or when they're, you know, a bit tricky or a bit dominating. It can be quite helpful to have that kind of background awareness of people are bringing a lot with them into the group. I don't know what it is, but actually having that awareness that our personal histories influence how we are. And as teachers, we know how to hold that. So I think that's the bones of it, Estrella. I think that's probably enough for now.
Yeah, thank you, Trish. Really, realmente cubriendo todos los aspectos, ¿no? De la evolución de los grupos, de la personificación del profesor, desde ese conocimiento no solo intelectual y de conceptos, sino somático, ¿no? En el cuerpo. Bueno, pues si te parece bien, Trish, abrimos ahora espacio y tiempo para, si las personas quieren preguntar lo que sea, podéis enviar las preguntas que tengáis, si queréis, en el chat, y las voy a formular yo en voz alta, de manera que Trish pueda contestarlas. Espacio para vosotros.
Well, as people are putting in, somebody coming, yes. Estrella, is that okay? Shall I answer that? Or will you read it out first?
Sí, la voy a leer ahora, perdona. ¿Qué pasa si el grupo no está dispuesto a realizar la práctica en el caso de adolescentes? ¿O tiene distracción?
Well, that's a very good question. It's a very good question. I think the group is crucial to this whole area. I mean, if teenagers aren't engaged, if they're not feeling that they belong in the group, that the group isn't in tune, or the process in the group isn't in tune with teenagers and what matters to them, then they're not going to engage. So I think the skill for you as teacher, I don't know, who was it who asked the question?
Carlos.
Carlos, where are you, Carlos? You put your hand up, I can't see you. There you are, Carlos, hi. Mexico, fantastic. So, I mean, your job, yeah, lovely. Your job as a teacher of young people, of teenagers, is to be on their wavelength. You know, your job is to know their culture, to know what matters to them, to be using examples that illustrates, that connects them to what matters. Maybe it's what happens on TikTok. I don't know what Mexican kids go for. In the UK, it would be TikTok. You know, to know what pop music they're really keen on, so that you're engaging them not as a teenager, but as somebody who understands what's important to them. I mean, you know this already, I'm sure. And then I would be doing I would keep the practices very short, but I would be doing an awful lot of questioning of them, getting them into small groups, getting tasks that are quite straightforward but quite short, getting them to tell you what matters to them. I don't know if this is making sense, but I would be all the time looking for ways in which I can engage them as a group. Maybe asking them, you know, what's going to help you as a group? What matters to you? And they may well say, well, what matters to me is what my peers think of me, what my friends think of me. You know, well, what makes you anxious? You with me? So that's what I would be asking them to tell you, and I would be engaging them in whatever way I can, in a way that would really relate to them, and it would be short and it would be task-based. Yeah. How does that sound, Carlos?
Mejor de lo que yo planteaba, porque me voy mucho a la práctica típica del mindfulness, en práctica pedagógica, o sea, como que se siente el mindful body, o sea, la práctica que tal vez para un adulto tiene conciencia, para los adolescentes es aburrido, ¿no? En cambio, sí es más divertido, es más de implicación y me suena que puede funcionar mejor. De hecho, sí lo he intentado hacer de maneras muy diferentes, pero obviamente siento que se desvirtúa el mindfulness. Pero digo, es la única manera de llamar su atención, o sea, no hago la práctica típica, pero ya con esto pues me da como la seguridad de hay que seguir por ese camino.
Absolutely, Carlos. I think you're so right. And I think that all of us have to adapt our courses, our sessions to the context that we're working in. We've all of us got to do that. I mean, whether we're working with teenagers, or I'm going to be next week working with scientists, very clever scientists who are researching cancer. I've got to be more cerebral with them because that's where they come from. You know, I've got to. I think that's partly our skill, but I would make it funny. I would use humor. I would be making fun of myself as an old man. I mean, you're not an old man, but compared to your teenagers, you're an old man. Yeah, I would be using plenty of humor. I would make it really alive. I wouldn't do too much stillness practice. I would make the stillness practice quite short. I would have them moving, you know, and stuff like that. So thanks, Carlos. That was a great question. I'd be interested to hear how things go.
Gracias.
Go to your group. Yeah, great.
Gracias, Carlos. Please.
Claro, sí. Nos vamos a comunicar, claro. Ya le informo.
Gemma pregunta,
Great, lovely.
le gustaría saber cuántas personas sería un grupo ideal. ¿Hay un mínimo y un máximo?
Oh, Gemma, that's a great question. That's a fantastic question. I wonder what your experience is. I used to, sadly, I don't work with people with cancer in groups anymore. I work one-to-one on the whole, but I used to work with people with cancer in groups, and I would find that six or seven was kind of on the low side. We can work with less, but the trouble is that if we work with, say, 5 people in a group, that's okay. But one person leaves, and 4 is a very small group. And what tends to happen is it's quite hard work. We tend to have to work one-to-one, and then you realize how hard it is to work because you're working one-to-one with 4 people in the room, you know. So I would say 6 is an optimal group size in terms of our low numbers. in terms of large numbers, I remember asking a colleague, a sort of more senior colleague to me, you know, what do you think of? I think I was going to have to work with a retreat group of 80, which seemed to me to be absolutely huge. And he said, oh, well, it's not a group, it's a gang. It's a crowd, you know, and I think it was true that I couldn't really, I could hold the room. It was quite difficult to hold a group. But I think, you know, once you're more experienced, I mean, maybe you already are, Gemma, I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of experience in this on this call. But once you're more experienced, I think for a short period of time, we can hold quite big groups, like 30. I held a group of 30 in South Africa in March for a couple of days. It was hard work. Because remember that if we are working with the group, we are holding the group process. So actually within that group, there will be all sorts of things going on. You know, people perhaps quite troubled, perhaps people a bit traumatized, maybe, people distressed. There's a lot going on that we don't always see, but we're holding. So I don't know what for you, Gemma, is a good group size. What group sizes do you work with? You're on mute.
Ahora, ¿me oyes? ¿Hola?
I can hear you through Maria. Yeah.
¿Sí? Vale, perfecto. Bueno, yo creo que para mí un grupo ideal, yo creo que depende también de las patologías que se traten o de los problemas que haya, porque precisamente es como has comentado tú. Encuentro que, por ejemplo, pues las personas con cáncer o tratamientos oncológicos, yo, por ejemplo, ahora soy una de ellas. Me acaban de diagnosticar pues un cáncer y estoy como un poco rara, ¿no? Como un poco... Entonces, poniéndome en el lado del paciente, pienso que también requiere esta persona una atención individualizada, aunque sea grupal, pero también un poco de atención individualizada porque cada uno lleva su caso. Entonces, supongo que en función de lo que tratemos. Creo que los grupos muy grandes pueden ser muy heterogéneos, entonces también puede dar mucha confusión. Habrá muchos que colaborarán, muchos que no, muchos que harán caso. Esta es mi opinión, tampoco entiendo mucho. Piensa que yo soy bastante novata, soy psicóloga de hace muy poquito y me estoy iniciando. Entonces lo que intento es aprender. Que, por cierto, me está gustando mucho esta charla y este aprendizaje. Muchas gracias.
Good. I'm glad, Gemma. That's lovely. I mean, I think one of the things that I want to get across, and I'm so glad with what you've said because it's given me an opportunity to do that. But one of the things that I think is very important to realize is that if we bring the group into the room and we hold the group and we hold awareness of the group as an entity in its own right, doesn't mean that we don't also relate to individuals. You know, I mean, I think all of us will have groups where, you know, there will be one or two people at different times that we feel concerned about. Perhaps kind of wonder, well, I wonder how they're getting on, or, you know, that they didn't look so happy this time, or I'm not sure they're practicing that much, or, you know, I'm wondering what they need, or whether there's something I can do to help. So I don't want you to think that it's either group or individuals. I think that if we can hold the group will then do a huge amount of holding of everybody, but there may well be individuals within the group that need some particular attention, and awareness, particular awareness. So, yeah, I really agree with you. Yeah. But there's nothing more magical than a group that's sort of really cohering and is performing, is really flying. I mean, it's just a wonderful experience, I think. And I think, unfortunately, working online as much as we do, I don't feel that quite so directly. I mean, it's there, but I don't personally experience it internally as I do working in the room. And I'm very lucky because at the end of this month, I'm going on 2 different trips, and in both of them, they're in-person teaching, and I can't wait. I mean, it'll just be such a treat to really, you know, work in person in the room with people. Yeah. How are we doing, Estrella?
Gracias, Trish, Gemma. ¿Tenemos alguna otra pregunta, Trish? Silvi pregunta qué sucede si la mayoría de los participantes no enciende la cámara.
Ah, very difficult, Sylvie, very difficult. I got into trouble the other day. I was working for Oxford Mindfulness Foundation, and they do a lot of, they do a morning, you might enjoy it, those of you who speak English, but they do a morning sit at lunchtime, and then they do an evening sit every day of the week, which is very impressive. Anyway, I stepped forward and I did a morning sit for them, and I about 5 times asked people to turn on their cameras, and a lot of people didn't, and I got ticked off because you know, for some people turning on the camera just isn't possible. It's not feasible. So I think it's very difficult, Sylvie. I must admit, I love it when people have their cameras on. I think that if you're teaching an 8-week course, do you teach 8-week courses? Do you teach mostly in 8-week sessions? No.
Por ahora solamente cursos de introducción.
Okay. No, that's more difficult. I think if you possibly can, perhaps in your promotional literature, or when people sign up, perhaps, or perhaps they're just dropping in, but to actually say, you know, one of the things that I request and I require is for you to come on camera. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to wear any special clothes or do anything special, but it's very important to me to be able to connect person to person with you on the screen. So I think if we're teaching 8-week courses, which I'm sure you will perhaps later on, I think you can make it a condition, you know, that if you want to come on this course, you know, it'd be great to have you join us. And actually one of the ground rules is that you keep your camera on. So that would be the trainings that we do, that Estrella and I do. Not this sort of session because it's quite different, but for a teacher training, everybody has to have their camera on. It's necessary. So I think that with some settings we can make it a condition. I think in an introductory drop-in it's more difficult. And then I think what we have to do is just work with the you know, work with the faces that we've got. You know, and I don't know if you've learned, but you can move the screen around. So I'm now moving you up into the middle, so I can see you right in the middle of my screen. And I'm moving the people who haven't got cameras on. I'm moving theirs down to the bottom, so that I've actually got a screen that's mostly got faces that are, you know, that are present. And I find that helps a lot, actually. And I also find that if there's somebody who I've not really connected with very much, or I feel isn't really that involved or engaged in the group when I'm working online, then I'll move them into the middle of the screen. And then they're right in my line of sight, right in the middle, which I find is very helpful, actually. So just remember that, you know, we can just click on somebody's thumbnail, we can move it around. And that's quite helpful for us to keep engaging with different people in the group. Yeah. Thanks, Sylvia. Good question.
Gracias, Trish. Gracias, Silvi. Una pregunta de Marisa.
Marisa.
Estar en grupos es un reaprender grupal como seres sociales que somos. Es como revalorizar el jardín de infantes, pero con más consciencia. Supongo que es como estar en el jardín de infantes, pero con más consciencia. ¿Cómo ablandar los miedos? Es la pregunta.
So Marisa, are you talking about the fears as a teacher or fears as a participant?
Como participante, porque cuando uno está en grupo en el jardín de infantes, digamos, entra sin tanto prejuicio, pero cuando uno ya tiene una historia recorrida, tal vez ya su mente está atravesada por muchos más miedos. Entonces los niños son más libres en ese sentido. me parece que en grupos de adultos se juega mucho este tema de los miedos, cómo ablandar toda esa parte al comienzo para que el proceso grupal se desarrolle de una manera, digamos, con qué herramientas nosotros podemos contar. Ay, no sé si hablé muy rápido, perdón, Estrella, a la traductora.
No,
Está bien. Participantes.
Marisa, it's such a good question. It's such a good question. And I would say to you, please come on the workshop and I will teach you. Because, you know, there are ways of establishing the beginnings of groups that, you know, where you will learn, if you come on the workshop, you will learn through your own experience of being apprehensive and being in a new group. And then seeing the different building blocks that we can actually put in place that are really helpful in helping a group come together and feel safe. That's what we're going for at the beginning, safe. We're going for people to be, and of course, mindfulness is a great gift for that. Because in mindfulness, we're practicing groundedness, we're practicing embodiment, we're bringing in practices, we're bringing awareness into the body, which in itself is steadying, it's settling. So not only have we got the group kind of structure, if you like, that's helping that group to form, but we've also got the practice that we're all doing together. So we've got these two, I don't know quite what to call them, I suppose two processes coming together of group forming, mindfulness studying, which actually lend themselves to each other very nicely. And my experience is that we bring those two together with a teacher who's really embodying mindfulness, who's grounded, who's steady. And actually the group comes together quite quickly. And actually the quicker the group comes together, the quicker it will then storm and turn into teenagers. And that's when the fun begins.
Gracias, Trish. Pregunta de Fátima. Me gustaría saber si vamos a tener la oportunidad de aprender su programa como instructor de MBCT para el cáncer. He estudiado su libro y sería maravilloso.
Well, I would absolutely love to, Fatima. Estrella and I and other colleagues in Barcelona have been talking about, is there a way that I could come over and work with Estrella and train teachers in MBCT for cancer? I would absolutely love to. I've never been to Barcelona, and I would, it would be my my great wish. I'd love to. So the answer is yes, I hope. Yes, we hope.
Estamos en ello, estamos en ello. Gracias, Fátima, gracias, Trish. De Jacqueline, ¿cómo trabajar el sostener el grupo cuando la mayoría de los participantes llegan tarde?
Ah, yes. Jacqueline, are we talking about an 8-week course?
Sí, grupos de 8 semanas.
Yep. Okay, so I've got some good tips for you. Okay, so number one, we always have the right. Are you online or are you in person?
En línea.
Online. If it was in person, I always have the right number of chairs ready. I have the equipment ready, and I start on time. And I would suggest that online you do the same. So you say to your group, we're going to start at whatever time, I don't know, 6 o'clock. If you are all here, that's great. I'm going to start anyway. So that's the deal. I will start at 6. The class will run from 6 to 8 or whatever you've decided. And, you know, it's really important, if you can be, to be punctual. If you can't, then I will start, and just join us when you can. We'll be starting with a practice, so just join us with the practice when you're ready. And people like to conform. And if you're clear and you say that this is the score, then I think you'll find that people will do their best, unless they want to be rebels. If they want to be rebels, then that's fine. They can be rebels. They'll miss out on some of the practice. Is that any help?
Sí, muchas gracias. Gracias.
Okay. Okay, great.
Gracias, Trish. Un comentario de Franca, una reflexión. Dice que...
Bless you, Sylvie.
Ah, ok.
Thank you, Franca.
En la reflexión de Franca dice que puede ser útil mencionar en el grupo que como facilitadores tenemos espacio para ellos al finalizar el grupo, si hubiese necesidad o algo en específico de alguna persona. No es una pregunta, es una reflexión.
Thank you, Franca. I think that's very helpful.
Yeah.
I think it's very important, Franca, exactly what you... So I'm hearing you, Maria. I don't know quite why. I'm hearing your Spanish much louder than usual. Okay, so Franca, I think you're absolutely right that part of our contract as teachers is to be available to our participants outside the group times. Absolutely right. And to be available to them and to have a contract of how it is that they can contact you. Is it by email? Is it by WhatsApp? You know, will you be available at the end of the class that they can just come and talk to you? So, of course, and my emphasis all the time is that, yes, of course, we're emphasizing the group, but that doesn't discount the needs of the individuals in the group. Of course not. So thank you for emphasizing that. I really appreciate that.
Gracias, Trish, Franca. Y finalmente tenemos una pregunta de Silvia. ¿Qué pasa si alguno de los participantes no puede asistir a toda la sesión?
What happens to the group?
Supongo que quiere decir que pasa en general, ¿no? Silvia.
What happens in general? I think that's something for you to take to your supervisor, Sylvie. It isn't really, I mean, it does affect the group when people are not attending. And certainly we need to look at that, but it's quite detailed. And I think, again, it's about the contract that you have with your participants. You know, it's about a clarity of, like, this course, what it involves, what's required of you, you know, of having a kind of laying it all out, because that's part of the holding of the group. We're going to do this, you know, it's going to be like this, you'll be required to do this, but sometimes people can't always attend. And if that's the case, then it depends on who they are. If it's a general public group, if it's a clinical group, then we probably need to catch them up. If it's a general public group, we also, but perhaps we would do that through an email or through a handout. So I think it's something to take to your supervisor and to work out with experience, maybe, Sylvie, you know, to work out what works for you. But I think you'll find that if the group is really active and really well held, I think you'll find that people will want to come if they can. And if they can't come, there'll probably be a good reason why they can't come. You know, they're not well, or they're looking after a family member, or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sylvie.
Ok, pues creo que sería el momento de terminar con las preguntas. Trish, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a todos, a todas por participar. Y las reflexiones y las preguntas, y unos momentos más para Trish.
Yes, thank you, Estrella. That was lovely. I enjoyed that very much, and your questions were fantastic. So thank you very much for being so engaged. And it's lovely. I mean, the worst thing in the world is when you give a little talk and then people are asked for questions and nobody's got anything that they want to ask because they're probably bored to bits. So hopefully you weren't bored to bits. I don't think so. So in a way, we've got Nora coming in here. Nora, have you got a quick question? Do you want to come off mute and ask the question? Maybe not. No, I'm going to assume.
No intencionado.
Yeah, I'm going to assume that she didn't. Yeah. Okay. So we've been talking a lot about group. We've been talking quite a bit about mindfulness, talking quite a bit about this workshop that's coming up in November. And I think the question that probably, for me comes to mind is, what has the mindfulness-based group got to offer, or what has mindfulness and the mindfulness group got to offer in the world that we're living in today? Because the world that we're living in today is a very different one to the world that, for instance, 40, 50 years ago, when John Kabat-Zinn was first developing MBSR. It's even very different from, the turn of the century when the first MBCT trials were taking place. It's a very different world. We've got some very, very different challenges. So one of the things that a number of us have been thinking about, and that I've tried to sort of bring into this book, this group book that came out last year, is kind of making a bit more sense of that. And this is something that on the workshop we will spend a bit more time on. But what I've done is I've cut down the slides so that maybe I'm just giving you a little taste of this, just to whet your appetite, or just to start some reflections. So I'm going to share the screen again. And here we go. So again, Estrella, could you just confirm you can see all right? Great. So let's just start with way back. I mean, this is 2013, but actually he was talking about this way back in the 80s, I think. And this is his quote that I've shortened it, but mindfulness could be the most important evolutionary opportunity for humanity, to be able to act out of the wisdom of a larger wholeness, rather than out of a more small-minded sense of self-interest. So that's quite a quote, isn't it? That mindfulness could support an evolutionary opportunity for humanity. And this wisdom of a larger wholeness, an interconnectedness, if you like, rather than this me, I, perspective that we see so much of, and that we're so probably aware of ourselves. So I want to just set some context here, which all of you will be all too well aware of. The world emergencies that exist in this year at this time are just enormous. I was going to give you some stats, but they're just too depressing, to be honest. I mean, I'll just drop in a stat that something in the region of coming towards 70 million people have not got enough food. 70 million people. Some people are in Africa are literally on the edge of famine. I mean, famine is when people die because they don't have enough to eat. So, this is huge. And then we're all too well aware of the refugees, the war, the conflicts, not just in Europe, but in Ukraine. But there are many wars around the world. There are many conflicts around the world. There are many people who are actually trying to escape some very tough situations that are oppressing them, and that are meaning that they can't live fulfilling lives with their families. And then we have the climate crisis, which again is absolutely huge. And something that I know in Spain, we had quite a mild summer this year, but I know that you didn't. You had a horrendous summer. And in fact, many parts of the world had a horrendous time this last season. And then we have issues of social justice. We have very widespread discrimination, people treated differently because of the color of their skin, people discriminated against because of the background they come from, or their speech, or their language, or just loads and loads of different ways in which we make people different. So when mindfulness first started, even though John Kabat-Zinn had this vision from the very beginning, it was, and it still is really, mostly focused on personal well-being. People come into mindfulness because they're stressed, because they're depressed, they're anxious. They've got some specific cancer, whatever. They've got some specific challenges that they're trying to learn how to manage differently. And increasingly what we're seeing is the need for, the need for also a collective well-being. Now, it's just like the group and the individual. We're not saying that it's all collective and no personal well-being, but equally, we're not saying that for most people, personal well-being can actually sit alongside collective well-being. And collective well-being is just where we kind of raise our eyes a little bit from this individual self-interest to actually look around us and look and see what's happening in the world, in our community, what's happening with our families, what's happening with if any of you stand at the school gates collecting your children, or having a look around at in your workplace. You know, who's looking stressed? Who do you know is suffering some health crisis, or some bereavement, or some relationship breakup? You know, it's all around us. This obviously individual challenges, but also collective challenges that actually affect us all. So one of the things that perhaps the group has to offer is this possibility that that actually I think I've gone wrong here. Hang about. What has the mindfulness group got to do with this? No, I haven't gone wrong. Sorry, it's a new slide I added just recently. So I think that the mindfulness group has the possibility of creating a healthy environment. There are no guarantees. Every group is different. Some function much better than others. However good, however skillful we are as group leaders, some groups just function better than others. There are lots of different conditions involved. But one of the things that group participants tell us is that peer learning, the learning that we learn from our peers, our colleagues, the people who are similar to us, the learning I get from Australia is probably going to be richer than the learning I might get from an expert. And as teachers, we're the experts. So if we can actually help the group be a healthy environment, there's a good chance that our group will learn a lot from each other, from within the group. I mean, I've seen this, and you've all seen this, I'm sure, over and over again. I think the other thing that's important to remember is that groups are often much more healthy than the individuals within them. We might have a group of individuals in the group who are quite poorly, perhaps they're quite, they're quite troubled, but actually they can come together in a group and be surprisingly healthy, surprisingly well functioning. So I think that's often quite reassuring. I want the next slide now. Where are we? Okay, great. So I've talked to you a lot about safety and inclusivity. And I'm hoping and I believe that safety plus inclusivity leads to interrelatedness, leads to this larger whole that Jon Kabat-Zinn has written about, interrelatedness. We know that mindfulness cultivates pro-social behavior. That's been written up. Ruth Baer wrote that up some years ago. And what does the group offer? And what does the added value, if you like, of the group? And I think that mindfulness plus group really clarifies values. That might happen as an individual in a mindfulness group, but I think we learn from others. We hear about their values. We learn about our own values. Undoubtedly, when we're in a group that's working well, that's an optimally functioning group in the mindfulness world, then we learn group skills. And these group skills we can take out into our communities. We can take them into our families. We can learn to disagree with somebody and not fall out with them, not move into conflict with them. We can learn to reconnect. We often learn to reconnect with nature in mindfulness. We can often learn to reconnect with others and reconnect with ourselves in a different sort of way, perhaps in the body. So I think reconnection is something that we learn a lot of in the group. And we learn about interrelatedness, which has already been mentioned. We learn to smile at our neighbour, who we've perhaps lived next door to for 20 years and we've never said hello to. We can just smile. We don't have to talk to them. We can just smile. We can learn to smile at the new mother at the church gate or the school gate. We can learn to offer coffee to somebody who's looking a bit harassed at work. We can do some little tiny gestures that often make a big difference. So I love this quote. The question is not how can I make a difference? but how can we make a difference? A simple shift of pronoun has the power to change the world. So I leave you with that quote. And with a big plea, please come to the workshop. I'd love to work with you. We would love to work with you. And we've got people, it's going to happen. Got people already booked up, but there's a few spaces for more. So there we are. And it's time, I think, to come back. I'm just getting my screen organized. Lovely to see you all. Lovely to see you all. So, Estrella, shall we finish up with the practice?
Sí, creo que ahora podemos terminar con una práctica. Es el momento perfecto. Estamos en tiempo.
Great, good.
¿Quieres hacerla tú la práctica?
So just invite. I would like to lead the practice. Thank you. Yes. So just inviting you to come to just to where you're sitting, however things are for you. And just to make yourself comfortable. So if you want to adjust your position, that's fine. If you want to lie down, that's fine. Just really, really doing whatever you'd like to do to make yourself comfortable, to welcome yourself into this space. And then when you're ready with your eyes closed or your eyes open, and yes, getting yourself something that makes you a little bit more comfortable is a great idea, another cushion or a rug or just something that just helps your position. So with your eyes open, your eyes closed, just simply coming into the body. Coming into a sense of your body sitting or lying if you're lying. With the points of contact between your body and whatever it's resting on. So if you're sitting on a chair, the points of contact may be in the soles of your feet. If you're kneeling or if you're sitting on the floor or lying down on the bed or on the floor, just noticing all the places where your body touches whatever is holding the body, the floor, the mattress, the cushion. And as we do that, just noticing how gravity is pulling us downwards, pulling us closer, bringing us closer to whatever we're resting on, the floor. And of course, ultimately, beneath the floor, there's the foundations of the house or the block of apartments where you're living. And beneath the foundations is the earth itself. So as we sit here, just really experiencing this relationship with the ground and the floor and with gravity and with this precious earth that holds us, that gives us food, that enables us to live, and that offers us much beauty in nature. So weight going down. And then when you're ready, perhaps expanding into a sense of the rest of the body. So perhaps the height of the body or the length of the body moving up or moving across. Just feeling the full span of body as it sits or lies. Perhaps noticing the spine and this really important structure that enables us to sit tall or lie long. And just noticing how that feels to you. This body is sitting tall, lying tall. And perhaps experiencing a sense of dignity in that sitting or lying. This body and its essential dignity and presence. And then when you're ready, and again, if you'd like to, perhaps coming to the breath. Perhaps seeing if you can find the breath somewhere deep in the body. And as you do that, just noticing how is the breath this evening or this morning, whatever time of day it is for you. How is the breath? And if in that noticing you're finding the breath is flowing quite freely, feels comfortable, feels possible to be with, then perhaps staying with the breath. But if, on the other hand, the breath feels a bit tight or has any discomfort within it, then maybe finding another place to rest your attention, perhaps the feet, perhaps your hands, contact. Maybe the seat of the body or the contact between the body and what it's resting on. So just choosing for yourself where you're going to rest your attention. That might be best for you right now in this practice. And always remembering that if at any point you notice that the mind is no longer with wherever you've chosen to rest your attention, but it's wandered off, remembering it's not a problem. It's just what minds do, they wander. And then that's an invitation for us to notice and simply come back. Back to wherever you're choosing to rest your attention. And then from here, as we come towards the end of the practice, just expanding into a sense of the whole body breathing, sitting, lying. And then if you'd like to, opening your eyes and seeing everybody on the screen. And perhaps if you'd like to, just offering appreciation to, I certainly feel much appreciation to all of you who've shown up here and who've been so lovely to be with, actually. Interesting, lots of questions. Lovely chance to explore the things that matter to us, which is basically about connection. That's what it's all about. Connection and presence. So before handing over to Estrella, thank you so much. And thank you to Maria, who's been translating so beautifully. Hope that I'll see some of you again. Estrella, thank you so much for asking me.
Un millón de gracias, Trish, por estar aquí. Es un placer, como siempre. Y bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos, a todas por elegir estar aquí esta tarde. Y bueno, cualquier pregunta, cualquier aclaración, cualquier cosa que necesitéis, sabéis dónde estamos y esperamos veros a muchos de vosotros el próximo mes de noviembre. Muchas gracias y si queréis podéis abrir los micros para despedirnos a viva voz y sentir, escuchar vuestras voces, ¿vale?
Gracias, un placer.
Gracias.
Gracias, hasta luego.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.